Hello, everyone, and welcome in. I think we have a good amount of people in the chat in the room joining us right now, so we are going to go ahead and get started here. I'm Taylor Overstreet. I'm part of the SurePoint marketing team. I'll introduce our great panel here in a second, but first I wanted to welcome you all in. We're really glad that you've joined us here for our annual State of the Legal Industry webinar. If 2025 felt like a year where a lot of things happened in the legal world, you're not imagining. It was busy, it was fast moving, and sometimes chaotic. And today is all about stepping back, making sense of it all. Over the next hour, we're going to dig into some of the biggest trends that shaped the legal industry in 2025. We'll talk about the record year for law firm mergers, a major rebound in lateral hiring, and how technology continues to creep further and further into everyday workflows, whether law firms are ready for it or not. More importantly, we're going to talk about what it all means, what it means for law firms, recruiters, law schools, and students, corporate legal teams, and what these shifts could signal for us in 2026. Now, let's introduce our panels here. Going from left to right here on the screen. Tim, if you want to get us started, just kind of introduce yourself, a quick background about yourself, and introduce yourself to our guests here.
Hi, everyone. Tim Corcoran. I'm a consultant to law firms and law departments. I've been doing this for almost 15 years after 2 decades of running legal technology companies. I specialize in things like compensation, profitability,
Great. Lindsey?
Hi, everyone. I am Lindsey Higgins. I am based in Boston, and I work at WilmerHale. I'm the firm-wide director of legal recruiting, and I oversee all non-partner recruiting for the firm.
Awesome. Michael?
Hey, I'm Michael Hill. I'm the CFO at Gould and Ratner. We're a 55-attorney firm in Chicago and Denver.
Nice. And last but not least, Bryson.
Hi, yep, I'm Bryson. I run a legal recruitment firm, Mosaic Search Partners, former big law attorney, Columbia JD, and excited to dive into the numbers here.
Awesome. Well, we welcome you all. Thank you for joining us as our great panelists talking about these topics. And finally, Flora will be our MC today, guiding us through the data, highlighting key takeaways, and keeping us on track as we move through the discussion. Just some housekeeping stuff for everyone attending live. This is an interactive webinar, so don't be shy. Drop your questions in the ask a question to the panel box at any point. I'll jump in when I can and try to bring them into the conversation. You can also use the attendee chat to react, share perspectives, compare notes with others tuning in. And one last thing before we get started, if you want to learn more about SurePoint, SurePoint Legal Insights, scan that QR code at the bottom of your screen, and you can explore additional reports, resources, and upcoming content as well. With that, let's dive into it. Phil, I'm going to turn it over to you. Let's get into it.
Well, thank you, Taylor. Appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining. For those that aren't familiar, my name is Flora. I'm VP of Sales for SurePoint Legal Insights. And I'm honored to share the insights and the data for 2025. If you joined us last year's webinar, I ended the webinar with 2 words that sort of gauged what we thought might happen in 2025. And those 2 words were buckle up. We expected a transformative year with a lot of change, and we sure got it, and that was a bit of an understatement. The legal industry certainly isn't or hasn't had the reputation for innovation and technological change, but I often use the analogy that what used to take 5 years in the legal industry when it came to any material change now seems to happen every 6 months. We did see a lot that happened during 2025. Taylor, you talked about some of those, but these are the things that stood out to me and the things that we'll be diving into today during the conversation. So 2025 was certainly a year of market consolidation. Mergers accelerated to record levels in 2025. Firms pursued combinations to drive scale. expand a geographic reach, and deepen client coverage. But the biggest risks showed up after the deal, especially as it comes to integration, cultural alignment, and talent retention. We saw a return to hiring growth in 2025, numbers that were the highest since the post-COVID years of 2021 and 2022, which were essentially a correction from 2020 and the pandemic slowdown. Bottom line, the competition for high-performing talent remains intense. We're starting to see changing business models. Private equity-backed MSOs are increasingly reshaping the legal market. They're influencing economics, pricing strategies, and operational structures. These are changing competitive dynamics and raising expectations around efficiency and scalability. We're seeing evolving talent shifts in the legal industry, longer paths to partner or equity partner, expanded non-equity tiers. We've seen some changes with entry-level hiring and developmental models. So tracking career progression is becoming a very big part of the law firm process when it comes to talent management and retention. There was some regulatory and political pressure forced onto the law firms. Firms face increased scrutiny around employment practices, DEI initiatives, and pro bono related programs. Some firms face difficult choices, push back on political pressure, or comply with external demands. And AI, you can't go anywhere without AI having a topic of the conversation. AI moved from experimentation to expectation. It's quickly becoming a baseline requirement for efficiency, differentiation, and client service. So before we jump in, I just wanted to open it up to the panelists to kind of talk about the thing that stood out to you guys as you look back on 2025. Bryson, would you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure thing. I think the biggest thing for me, whether it's just because of the flash of the circumstance or the actual numbers on impact we haven't seen yet, but I think the pressure from the federal government on law firms was completely unprecedented. And not that I've been around that long, but as far as I can tell, and from what I've heard, nothing like that's happened in the industry before. And the speed and adaptability that many of these firms have had to show as a reaction to that has been interesting to observe, to say the least. I think we're going to see the impacts of that ripple out for the next few years. And so anything that has to do with tracking that and seeing how different firms have maneuvered and what the reactions from their attorneys will be is something that I'm particularly interested in.
And Michael, what was the big thing that stood out to you?
It's the lateral market. It's crazy. The ability of attorneys now to know exactly what their dollar value is, the ability to figure out what other firms are offering, the ability to understand the exact market conditions on a daily basis is, to me, unprecedented. I've been doing this for 10 years and I have not seen a year like this one where it was such a fantastic market to be an associate or an income partner, especially if you have a book of business.
Agreed. And Lindsey?
So I think and it seems so long ago at this point, but January 2025, I was very caught off guard and surprised by the amount of government employees that started applying. And Wilmer has a big presence and kind of open door policy between coming and going to the government, but it wasn't anything I had experienced before. The sheer amount of candidates that would be in touch for opportunities if possible. And the other thing, kind of similar to the last comment, was kind of all the information being readily available. I had a lot of candidates that were saying, I know of a candidate that got this offer, or I know somebody that got this signing bonus, or just kind of the shared knowledge that people have, whether it's, they're able to find it somewhere online or people are just more open talking about that type of stuff. That was something that I feel like really came up last year that I hadn't anticipated or experienced in the past.
Awesome. And Tim, what did you see in 2025 that stood out? We lost your audio again, Tim.
How about now you can hear my beautiful voice?
We got you.
So lots went on, so much to talk about, but I'll start with just M&A. The number of law firms that are acquiring, merging, or bringing on large groups is a good sign and also a warning sign. We'll get into this a little later, but acquisitions are not in and of itself a strategy. They're a great way to execute a strategy, but firms that acquire without really understanding what they're getting themselves into could be a problem. I don't know if I could say anything better than what was already said about laterals. It's all about compensation. And yes, they do talk, and that will never go away. But probably the biggest thing I see a trend that I'm dealing with in my clients is the path to partnership. It's changing, and it's changing for positive reasons. It should be harder and longer because over the generations before us, we promoted far too many people to become owners who were great lawyers, but were not ownership material. So this is a bit of a correction. But let's not kid ourselves. It's also a way to restrict the number of people who share in the profits. So that trend, I think, is growing.
Awesome. So we'll dive in. So market consolidation. So law firm mergers reached record levels in 2025 as firms pursued scale, resilience, global client coverage. Growth is increasingly inorganic, placing pressure on integration, culture, and partner retention. Mergers were characterized by historic global combinations, major transatlantic tie-ups, and strategic nationwide consolidation. Firms merged to scale, broaden their global footprints, and better support complex cross-border client work in an increasingly competitive legal market. The war for talent has been raging post-COVID. Firms are looking for quicker ways to scale and grow. We see firm and practice group combinations are accelerating at record paces. 2025 was a record year for law firm combinations, both in terms of deal volume, 59 mergers, and in the number of attorneys moving from a smaller firm to a larger firm, over 2,300 attorneys. We see a larger number of attorneys moving in 2020, but with the least number of actual combinations. Most of the activity was pre-COVID, and included a few very large mergers like Troutman and Pepper Hamilton and Faegre Benson and Drinker Biddle, which is why you see that number in 2020 is pretty high. You'll see the number of combinations involving Am Law 200 firms has remained relatively consistent over the past 4 years, meaning overall growth and merger activity is being driven primarily by the mid-market. A number of firms completed multiple mergers during this time frame. In 2025, Freeman Mathis, Stevens and Lee, Womble, and Taft each completed more than one merger, underscoring their desire to expand quickly and strategically. And our analysis also tracks retention post-merger. It's one thing to grow through a merger. It's another to ensure everyone buys in and stays. Here's a look at the list of mergers since 2020 and the average retention rates as of early 2026. For the mergers that have happened in 2025, the average retention across all 59 combinations is 92%. 29 of the 59 mergers still show 100% retention post-combination. If we look at the 47 combinations from last year, only 8 still show everyone at the new combined firms, an average retention rate of 79%. The combinations involving firms acquiring smaller firms with less than 25 attorneys has shown the best chance of keeping everyone together. Litigation dominates firm combinations, which isn't surprising, as is the industry largest practice. Across 52 of the 59 combinations, the smaller firm's largest practice was litigation. Labored employment and corporate were the largest practices in 3 of the combinations, and environmental was the largest in 1. Office expansion remains a consistent driver for merger activity. 30 of the 59 combinations resulted in new offices being added to the larger firm, inherited from the smaller firm. Overall, these trends are largely consistent with previous years. Since 2020, Fenimore Craig has been the most active acquirer, completing 8 mergers. Lippis Mathias and Spencer Fain followed with 5 mergers each. And with respect to geographic expansion, 2025 saw Chicago as the top market for new offices, with 6 added to the larger combined firm. New York City and DC were next with 5 each. but since 2020, New York City has seen the most expansion as part of firm combinations. And before we jump to the next slide, Tim, you started talking about it a little bit with respect to mergers and the things that firms need to consider. Do you want to expand on that a little?
Sure. I think if a firm has a pretty well-articulated strategy, it knows where its opportunities for growth are, whether geographic or practice-specific, or providing new services to new clients. An acquisition can be a great way to execute on that. It's essentially just a build versus buy analysis. Should we go hire people, train people, or can we go acquire and be instantly in the market? That's a great idea, and it often works. But here's the challenge. I think too many firms are pursuing acquisitions because they think that the bigger we are, the more we're going to make. And 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't always equal 3. Sometimes 1 + 1 + 1 equals 2.5. Right? Meaning that the sum of the combination is going to generate less in both revenue and profits than what you had before if you don't handle it well. I boil it down to this. Look, the primary economic objective of most law firms is to grow top-line revenue. Profit is a byproduct, not the objective. And so the way to do that is rates times hours times timekeepers. Now, for 20 years now, clients have been putting immense pressure on rates and hours. So the variable left is timekeepers. It's the only one that the law firms can control completely. And so if that's all that's left, it's not a strategy, really, it's a last resort. So this is why there's so much effort, and we'll talk about this when we get into the non-equity track. There's other ways, other levers to generate more profits, even if revenue is flat or declining. So you don't always have to just make it a bigger building with more people, because they all come with a cost, right? So if you can find ways to generate profit without just getting the scale, then that can be a very helpful tool in addition to using the build versus buy strategy of acquisitions to fill.
Awesome. Bryson, Lindsey, or Michael, did you guys have anything you wanted to add? How mergers have impacted it?
I actually have a quick question for Tim on this. We saw the retention rates there in the 70s, upper 70s for last year, which was actually a little bit higher than I expected. Do you find when these mergers happen that a much lower percentage of people are actually happy with the merger? Because for us, the reason our Denver office exists is because some mergers result in a lot of unhappy attorneys.
Yeah, there's so many acquisitions that take place as a result of an opportunity. Oh, we hear the firm across town is struggling, or I have a friend who's unhappy and his group wants out. And so we don't approach it as, is this a tactic to effectuate our strategy, or should we just look at the merits of this? And when we do that, we look at comp, right? We try to figure out where these people would fit into our comp ladder. And sometimes politically, we don't want anyone joining us that are going to jump right to the top. Other places are like, hey, if they bring the revenue, let them in. But when you look at that and you don't think about all the cultural aspects, that's when you start to see that fall off after people come in and we realize we didn't check enough to see if they have the same kind of culture. Now, culture doesn't have to be that we all have the same, shop at the same stores. It could mean something like we have a culture focused on sharing and collaboration and delegating to the cheapest person who's very capable of doing the work, but we get the most profit from leverage. But another culture that says, oh no, we're paid to keep the work ourselves, and then and only then do we delegate. Those things are killer when it comes to comp time, and we find out what did we get ourselves into. So I think those are the things that as law firms get better at this, their checklists aren't just looking at the financials, they're understanding really what is the culture and the climate in which everyone operates in this other firm, and will it fit in our organization?
Love that.
I have a question I'd like to jump in here from the chat from Kevin. This is for Tim. Looking ahead, will PE, I'm guessing private equity, finally break into law firm investment in 2026? And who goes first? AmLaw 100, 200, or smaller? Do you think that will increase or decrease firm mergers?
Kevin's jumping ahead on us.
Yeah, I'll reserve most of my commentary for that section, but I'll say this. I wrote an article in 2008, it's somewhere on my website, about private equity and why they think law firms are a terrible idea. Law firms are big cash businesses, and you'd think that'd be very attractive, but you can't chain the lawyers to their desk. They refuse to productize. They're not focused on profit, and they're unmanageable. What's changed? Well, private equity sees AI suddenly bringing in an opportunity to productize law firm services in a way that has never been available before. So they are hovering, but I don't know where they'll land first. If only because of the regulators, they may start in the plaintiff or the small firms and move upstream from there.
Awesome. All right, let's jump ahead. So a record year for lateral hiring growth as well. Here's an overview of lateral hiring across all attorney types for AmLaw 200. We ended 2025 up 8.8% when compared to 2024. The 13,500 lateral hires was the highest amount since 2021 and 2022, which again were inflated years when you look at the correction from COVID during 2020. Interesting to note, while we were up, or we did end the year up by 8.8%, we did a webinar back in November looking at the first 10 months of the year. We were actually on pace to finish the year close to 15% increase. So we did go up in 2025, but we slowed a bit in Q4. Going a bit further into the numbers, we thought we'd break out AmLaw 50 from the AmLaw 51 to 200 to see if there are any differences in the hiring patterns. As you can see, 40% of all lateral hires in 2025 occurred within the AmLaw 50. This is up from 37% last year and 35% the year before. So AmLaw 50 continues to separate itself from the rest of the industry. The firms keep getting bigger and hiring more. We also thought we'd look at AmLaw 200 versus the rest of the firms we track. We track close to 5,800 law firms. The total number of hires across all non-AmLaw 200 firms eclipsed 15,000 in 2025, setting a record for most hires outside the AmLaw 200. Now we'll look at AmLaw 200 hires by attorney type to see where the gains are coming from. All types were up in 2025, but counsel hiring grew the most in 2025, up 18%. Associate and partner hiring were up as well, but not at the levels counsels were at. Total counsel and partner hires ended up being all-time highs, whereas associate hiring was up, but still lags the associate hiring boom that came from 21 and 22. It's one thing to look at hiring, but it's another to track how long people stay after they get hired. This chart looks at retention rates of attorneys hired as a lateral, specifically the percentage of attorneys that stay at a firm at least 3 years after joining the firm. You see a big uptick in years 24 and 25, but that just means not enough time has lapsed on the recent hires. The average across all years at the bottom is inflated based on those numbers. So if we just look at 2015 to 2022, meaning the 3-year window has closed on those hires, the average retention rate for AmLaw 200 associate hires is 52%. For counsels, 61%, and for partners, 76%. So over an 8-year period, basically nearly half of all associates hired left within 3 years. 2 out of 5 counsels left within 3 years, and just under 1 in 4 partners left in 3 years. I did a comparison with other firm groups to benchmark the AmLaw 200 against. The retention rates for the same time period for the AmLaw 50 is slightly higher, up 2% for associates and up 4% for partners and counsels at 80% and 65% respectively. And then we looked at the firms outside the AmLaw 200, and you'll see that the numbers are actually less. For associates, the average is around 45% that stay at least 3 years, partners 70%, and counsels is down at 60%. I'll pause there. Does anyone have any comments about retention or specific things that maybe Lindsey or Michael, you guys can talk about, programs that you guys are doing to hold on to folks in your firm?
Sure, I can talk about this. I partner with the person that is in charge of this at our firm, but I don't have a lot in here. But I will say the number of resumes that I review that have very short stops, or a year here or 2 years under their belt, and then they're already looking to move. I have absolutely noticed that you're not getting lifers making life changes. I'm moving to a city where my current firm doesn't have a job, and that explains for the change right now. And it's always something we dig in on. Is this your choice? Are you leaving because you don't like the culture, or is it that you haven't gotten traction and you're being asked to leave? I think a lot of the conversation that I participate in, both internally and externally, is some of the attorneys, what are they doing to help them get sticky at that firm? A lot of them expect the firm to do things. Well, the firm should do this. The firm should offer this program, and we're trying to get them to take responsibility for their traction, but also giving them the tools to help them with that. Obviously, the return to in-office, we are 4 days a week when it's not a closed office because you can't physically get to it due to snow. And that has helped a lot with stickiness. So I do think some of this is still kind of the post-COVID world and movement. You have people that started remote that never really got to be known. And I'll be curious if in a year or two this changes, because so many firms have office presence requirements now.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's been interesting. You know, we hired our first in-house recruiter in 2024. We gave him the title of Director of Talent Acquisition, and honestly, it feels like he's becoming more of Director of Talent Retention. We're really trying, when we get someone in the door, to make it clear that we want them here for the long run. And some of these people are taking our offers, signing them, and then just not showing up, saying, you know what, I'm actually going to go a completely different direction. And so, I'm sure Bryson can speak a little bit more to this, but it's been really difficult trying to focus on both adding good talent and keeping good talent at the same time.
And Bryson, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something I've heard universally across like many different sectors within big law firms, especially like even on the admin side, is that people are accepting offers and then not even clocking in and just saying, hey, I decided to go in a different direction. So there's almost this, like the transaction costs of moving or picking a new firm are so low that could be like an in-office change where it's like you don't have to face these people in real life. So maybe you feel less attached. There is more information, maybe a little bit more transparency. People feel like, maybe another option is a better fit. Not exactly sure where it's all coming from, but it's definitely a theme that I've seen. And I would want to add in a little bit more of like an emotional element from the COVID and pandemic era. I think a lot of us had a lot of time to reflect on things, me included. And I think it actually gave people a much shorter span to make that kind of pivot, where if they're in a situation and they're unhappy, I think prior to 2020, maybe they would have been willing to stick it out for 5, 6, 7 years. Nowadays, I think the culture has shifted where attorneys don't feel like they need to do that. And if they're somewhere for 2 or 3 years and it's not working for them, there's way less of a hesitancy to just look for another option. And though I know firms aren't super excited to see people with resumes who have been in a couple different firms, I mean, at the end of the day, they are getting hired. Firms are still deciding to hire people who have been at 2 or 3 firms, depending on your practice group. So, there's a market demand and supply thing there too. And I think that might be here to stay, to be honest.
Awesome. We're jumping ahead a little. So now we're going to take a look at hires by diversity, specifically in this chart, looking at gender diversity. 2025 saw a 17.5% increase of more male hires across all attorney types versus female hires, but the gap is at its lowest it's ever been. 2025 saw a 15.3% more female hires compared to 2024, where male hires were at 10.1% in 2024. This allowed the gap to close from 23.2% in 2024 to 17.7% that we saw this year. A continued trend we are seeing is more female associates are being hired than males. This correlates to what we are seeing in terms of entry-level hires. More females are entering the firms right out of law school, so the pool of associates is leaning female. 2025 saw 2.7% more female associate lateral hires than male, and that's up from 2024, where it was virtually even. The gap for male and females for counsels closed a bit in 2025 to 8.5%. From 30% difference in 2024. The 1,128 female counsel hires represented a 30% increase over 2024. And for partner hires, we continuously see more, almost close to double or a little more than double more male partner hires than female hires. This year, we actually saw a slight increase in the gap, up to 108% more male than female hires from 107 in 2024. But the 1,019 female partners hired represented a 10% increase over 2024. Here we're going to look at ethnically diverse hires in the AmLaw 200, and the gap between non-ethnically diverse hires and ethnically diverse hires continues to shrink as well. Although it's quite large, it went from 179 in 2024 down to 157% gap in 2025. Diving in, you can see the gap is quite considerable across all attorney types, but the trend is closing. For associates, the gap went from 115 down to 91%, and the 2,733 represents a 20% increase from 2024. The gap for counsels and partners remains quite large, but again, it's closing ever so slightly, down from 284% last year to 273% for counsels. And then for partners, we see a 7% closing of the gap versus 2024. The 536 ethnically diverse partner hires was an 11.6% increase over 2024, and the most since 2022. Here we're looking at AmLaw 200 lateral hiring by where they came from. 44% of all AmLaw 200 hires were from other AmLaw 200 hires. That's slightly down from 45% in 2024. Hiring from outside the AmLaw was down 3% as well, from 29% to 26%. Government hires filled this gap. 7% of all lateral hires came from the government, up from 4% from 2024, and also up from 5% in 2021, which was during the last administration change. It gets more interesting when we break out the data from lateral hires. When you split the data by AmLaw 50 and the rest of the AmLaw 200, 58% of all hires into the AmLaw 50 came from firms in the AmLaw 200. This is down slightly from 24, but in line with what we've seen over the past 8 years. Only 11% of all hires into this group came from firms outside the AmLaw 200. Other numbers are pretty consistent with overall AmLaw 200 hiring patterns. For the firm group of 51 to 200, the majority of their hires come from firms outside the AmLaw 200 at 36%. 35% of those also come from the same 51 to 200 grouping. Here we're looking at attorney exits. We split the numbers by AmLaw 50 versus the 51 to 200, and we see 23% of all attorneys that left an AmLaw 50 go to another AmLaw 50. The number is down to 9% that leave and go to a 51 to 200 firm. The majority of exits for a 51 to 200 are either to another 51 to 200, 17%, or to firms outside the AmLaw 200, 18%. More attorneys leave an AmLaw 50 and go to a corporation, go in-house at 10% versus 8% that do this in that second group of 51 to 200. Before we get into here, any comments anyone has around the hiring of diverse and or by where people go or come from?
Yeah, I wanted to add some comments on the diversity numbers, actually, because
Yeah, sure.
I think they can be a little bit misleading for folks. Couple things to acknowledge. First thing being, there is going to be a bit of a lag in the effects that we see there from the pipeline coming from law schools, given the affirmative action ruling and the way that schools have implemented that, and the way those numbers have shifted at different T14 schools, especially. So we're probably going to see that ripple out. I mean, it's going to take 3 to 6 years or longer for that to actually have a solid impact. For the gender gap closing among associates, I think that matches like a trend we've already seen coming out of the law school pipeline, where it's just a lot more law students are women now, and that's going to continue to go up, actually, in my opinion. One of the things that people actually slept on a little bit with the affirmative action is that there was a lot of affirmative action happening for men, because if you go just based on test scores, women usually test highly, like above the average for male. And so a lot of law schools were doing a gender balancing thing that they can no longer do legally. So I think we're going to see those numbers increase, which, I mean, not a bad thing, honestly. And then
100%.
hopefully at some point that will be reflected at the partnership level. But again, that's going to take, 8 to 15 years, depending on how that all shows out. So I think even though the diversity hiring metrics seem like they're increasing and that everything's good, I think there are some things to look out for outside of the direct numbers we see here. And so the battle is definitely not won there. And I think we'll probably see a little bit of a regression in the coming years.
Awesome. All right, switching gears a bit to look at lateral hires by practice areas. Here's the 6 largest practices that produce the most hires and generally are the largest practices in most firms. Litigation, not surprisingly, had the most hires, accounting for 37% of all hires. Corporate was second at 17.5%, and labor and employment at 9% of all hires. While those produced the most hires, real estate and banking actually led the way in growth year over year at 31% and 29.5% respective growth compared to 2024. We also saw a double-digit growth in corporate at 15.7%. Real estate, when we dive into attorney types, real estate saw double-digit growth across all attorney types, but the biggest gains came in the associate ranks at almost 47% year-over-year growth for associates. Banking also saw big increases in associate hiring at 46%, followed by corporate at 20.5%. For counsel hiring, litigation led in growth year over year at 21.7%, followed by real estate at just under 17% and corporate at 14.5%. Banking was down by 6.5% compared to 2024. And for partner hiring was up across all 6 of these practice areas. IP led the way at just under 18%, followed closely by banking at 16%. Real estate, labor, and employment also had double-digit growth at just shy of 12% and 10% respectively. Looking at the next 10 largest practices, tax led the way at 552 hires, followed by trust and estates. Then close behind were healthcare, bankruptcy. Insurance was the only practice that see a year-over-year decline across all hires. In terms of growth, immigration led the way at 88% growth in comparison to 2024, followed by government at 38%, environment at 34%, healthcare at 26%, and ERISA at 24%. Immigration was up across all attorney types. For associates, it grew by 57%. Government was next at 46%, environment was third, and other practices saw double-digit growth like healthcare, tax, and ERISA. Trust and estates and insurance were the only ones to see declines across the associate ranks. Counsel hiring saw big gains across multiple practices. Immigration, ERISA, bankruptcy, environment, healthcare all led the way. Practices to see double-digit growth in addition to those were information technology, tax, and government. And again, insurance was down 26%, trust and estates down 2% compared to 2024. And partner hiring was up big in immigration, growth at 186% compared to 2024. Government was next, then trust and estates, while it was down in the other 2 areas, grew their partnership ranks hiring at 30.5% compared to 2024. Other practices with double-digit growth were healthcare, environment, bankruptcy was flat, tax, IT, and insurance were practices that declined in this area in 2024. With the growth in AI, we added the specialty of artificial intelligence in the early part of 2024 to account for the increase in law firms hiring and calling out their expertise in AI. AI has grown fast in numerous ways. The growth in lateral hiring is mirroring that. Lateral hires within this specialty across all attorney types was up 68% in 2025 compared to 2024. We saw associates leading that most of that growth at 106% growth, while partners and counsels also saw sizable gains. While hires slowed in Q4, we compared to the first 3 quarters of 2025, job openings increased as we headed into 2026. This was pulled together from our recent quarterly jobs report. In the AmLaw 200, we saw an increase of 26% in job openings in December 2025 compared to December of 24. Job closures also rose, but only at 8%, meaning net open jobs increased year over year as we're heading into 26. Other trends to keep an eye on, corporate and real estate openings increased by 33 and 20% respectively. And job postings where the requirements are calling for some sort of AI specialization are also surging. They're up almost 200% in comparison to last year. And within Q4, comparing Q4 to Q3 of 25, there was a 40% increase in new job openings involving AI. Any other questions or any other comments that anyone has with respect to the hiring gains of this year? Tim, do you want to jump in a little here?
Well, I'll just say the firms that are hiring, let's say, in all cyclical practice, like litigation right now, 2 years from now, we're going to be wondering why they can't keep their people. I can't tell you how many times I've run into firms that staff up big for a new portfolio of work that are working on some large mass tort or class action defense, and yet they don't do anything to generate revenue to replace the revenue they're working on. So in 3 years, nobody's going to be busy, and suddenly we can't keep them. Right? It happens in every cyclical practice. So name them. What's going to happen is when there's a high spot too, is people who know there's a trough coming, the best time for them to move is right then and get a guarantee across the street for the next couple of years they'll ride out the storm. So there are economic considerations behind all this. Not just are we able to keep our people because our competitors are paying more. Sometimes it's absolutely within our control if we understand what's going on.
Gotcha. I had a question I wanted to jump in with, and particularly I might want to put it to Bryson, just to kind of see what you're seeing in your experiences. Right now, and Tim kind of alluded to the fact that it might be the right time to move. It's hot right now in the lateral market. Who do you think has more leverage in lateral hiring going into 2026? Is it the candidates, the people that you work with trying to get placed, or is it the firms that are trying to fill spots a little faster and we see the uptick in the lateral hire? The firm trying to get more people in, or the candidates that are saying that I'm exactly what you need? What do you see in your day-to-day?
I mean, I think I'm always going to give the more weight to the firms, and it's been that way at least for the past 4 years. But it is very practice group dependent. So, I mean, if you're in real estate, then yeah, you have a ton of leverage right now because a lot of real estate groups really need to hire associates. There's not as many of them to go around, especially, I mean, I mostly focus on AmLaw 100 or like Vault 50 area. So if you're there, things are looking pretty good. If you're in maybe tech transactions, they're doing a little bit better than they were last year and the year before, but it's still not fantastic from a demand perspective. So there are a lot of folks that I'm working with who are trying to move to the next firm and just have a huge issue getting traction. And in any other market, they'd be star candidates. So it just really depends what your practice group is looking like. But for those numbers that we saw earlier, where the hiring is up or the job listings are up, you can bet that those candidates are going to have a lot more weight to throw around when they're trying to decide where they want to go and what they can negotiate for sign-on bonuses and other guarantees.
Okay, gotcha. That's cool.
All right, shifting gears back to that question I think Kevin had earlier. In the recently released Thomson Reuters State of the Legal Market report, they called out what we are also seeing in the industry that alternative providers and MSOs or managed service organizations are looking to reshape the competitive landscape. MSOs have been popular in healthcare, accounting, financial service industries. And they help support the business of law while professional entities focus on the delivery of legal services. Firms are struggling with the rising costs of technology and talent, partner profitability, demand for efficiencies, and a desire to scale without having to merge. Private equity is leveraging the MSO model to gain a foothold into legal, with the exception of Arizona and to some degree Utah. It's illegal in the US for private equity to own a direct share of a law firm. The MSO model is proven to be a backdoor for private equity to get involved. Once involved, they will push the traditional law firm business model to new boundaries. You see more and more firms, we're seeing firms mention their interest in this model. This article talked about both newly combined McDermott Schulte and a 70-attorney firm Cohen and Gresser as expressing interest. We're seeing Holland and Knight on their website report that they have been involved in firms advising on MSO transactions, as well as help restructure law firms interested in obtaining finance investment. And law firms have been outsourcing back office and support services to ALSPs and LPOs for years as a means to gain efficiencies and a competitive edge. It'll be interesting to see this next chapter of organization change play out. And Tim, did you want to expand on your comment that you were talking before when we were talking about this topic?
We'll see what his microphone, hopefully his microphone's cleaned up here. Tim, let's test it out a little bit.
You can hear me right now, okay?
Oh, yeah, that look actually better, yeah.
Yeah, I'm on my backup computer because my other one blew up right before we got online. So sorry about that, folks.
All good.
This is a profession that very much values its monopoly on the provisioning of legal services to consumers, both corporate and individuals. And the bars have said, no, you cannot have unauthorized practice of law, and you can't have non-lawyer owners and so on. Look, let's not kid ourselves. The bar associations are not there to protect access to justice. If they were, we'd have more access to justice. They're there to protect the profession from competition. So if private equity came along and said, we will give you $1 billion if you let us own your law firm and run it, someone sooner or later is going to crack and the bars will allow it. I guarantee it. But the reason it hasn't happened yet is because law firms aren't yet the great investment we think they are. As I said before, I mean this with all respect, right? Lawyers don't want to be managed. It's well known, right? It's Dr. Larry Richards talked about it for years. And so if you say, if we're going to run this like a business, there's certain things we need to do to be a business, then we expect you to contribute in these ways. But not every partner will get on board with doing what's profitable or leveraging the right thing or sharing credit or collaborating and hunting in packs and all the things that would be necessary to be a well-run business. So I don't think there's going to be an avalanche of private equity coming in to take over law firms. I think they're going to dabble around the margins until they can figure out, is this a business structure that we can make money on while influencing the decisions in the board?
Awesome.
Before we moved on, I just kind of wanted to get Michael's thoughts on this a little bit from a CFO's perspective and kind of outline some of the biggest risks that you've seen about as far as the different management and that need to be taken into account when adopting a new a system or a model or anything like that, what firms might be thinking.
And we're in an industry where historically people have been slow to move in any aggressive direction. And when you see a small misstep, it can completely freak people out. This would be a huge, huge change to start bringing in private equity funds. I mean, even when you see firms doing mergers and acquisitions, it can lead to some people having no understanding of what the business model is now supposed to look like Tim was saying earlier. I can't imagine how a firm is going to go ahead and say, yes, give me a bunch of money and tell me how to run my business. It's just not going to happen, at least not easily and not quickly. You've got a lot of people who are very, very smart running law firms, but they're not smart about business. And you're going to have people giving them money and saying, we know everything about business, listen to everything we say. And you've got some big egos who perhaps aren't going to accept that model. The other issue is, at the end of the day, what do law firms offer? They offer people answering questions and providing advice. Private equity is a lot better at sort of building out things that aren't just related to people. A lot of private equity models are related to, you need funds to build a big warehouse, we can help with that. Or you need funds to build a data center, we can help with that. Unless you're a firm that's going to say, we need a lot of money to build out a crazy AI infrastructure, there isn't necessarily an obvious market opportunity right now. And I think that's kind of what Tim was hinting at.
Got it.
I think I might slightly disagree there, just to add an extra point. I mean, I agree mostly, but I do think there is a pressure for partner compensation and guarantees. So, spending money on an AI build out might not be something that a firm wants to do. But if you're, I don't know, in the vault 50 or so, and you really want to start eating at like a vault 20 firm, and you can't compete for talent, that extra cash inflow would allow you to go get people who are real heavy hitters and give them guarantees for a couple of years that would be unheard of otherwise. So that's the main path I see that firms might go into league with private equity to get that advantage. But I mean, we'll see. Anything that happens with that is going to take a really long time, I think, still, for the same reasons both of you mentioned.
I'll say
I do think that is the model right there that you're hitting, Bryson, is the one model where it can work. The issue is that a long-term play or a short-term play? Because if you try to build this out for the long term, will it work? Maybe, maybe not.
I'll say that I have a client in Australia that did this very thing. A few years ago, one of the big four firms helped them switch from a partnership to a corporation, and I helped them rewrite their compensation plan, which meant also deciding which partners got to be senior executives in the new business. And that was specifically for what you said, Bryson. They were going to take on capital, and sure enough, within 2 years, they did take on private equity to help build out and productize some of the services. It was also to fund expansion and growth, and they did not want to fund everyone. And the owners of the business did not want to share with everyone. So a number of partners were de-equitized in that process. So it's, you know, if the money comes in, not everyone's going to share equally.
Well, this kind of leads into the next topic, evolving talent shifts and what we're seeing in the change of the law firm model. Law firm partnership model has dated back to the 19th century and has remained unchanged for the last 150 years, but the traditional model is being challenged on multiple fronts. In the spring of last year, we set out to explore a more specific area, the growing of the non-equity partner tier, particularly outside the ranks of the largest firms by revenue. Although this tier has existed for nearly 50 years, it has recently seen a significant expansion and is now a major force reshaping the legal industry. This article from Bloomberg, published right before our launch of our survey, mentions that 87 of the MLO 100 currently have non-equity partner tiers. 80 of the 87, 70 have increased that size post-COVID. According to the article, as well as data from the American Lawyer, with the current trajectory, there will soon be more non-equity partners than equity partners among the top grossing law firms, and that divide will only continue to widen. The primary driver has been both economic and structural flexibility, specifically as allows firms to grow revenue and leverage talent without diluting equity and increasing long-term financial risk. Just last week, an article came out in the American Lawyer about Sullivan & Cromwell and Skadden going to the two-tier system, and the rise of AI and competition will only accelerate the model moving forward. In 2025, we saw a record number of partner promotions in the MLaw 200. There was a 50% increase in promotions as compared to 2024. Attorneys that were promoted to partner that joined the firm as a lateral grew by 52% in comparison to 24, whereas attorneys that were promoted to partner that joined as an entry level grew by 46%. This was the first year to see an increase in promotions by both categories since 2022. And the question is the rise in the non-equity tier being the reason for a rise in partner promotions? While there has been an increase in partner promotions, the time it takes to become partner has held steady over the past few years. 2025 saw the first decrease in the number of days to make partner for an entry-level hire since we've been tracking the statistic back in 2015. Overall, the time to make partner for an entry level has increased by 52% over the past 10 years. Alternatively, we see a slight increase in the number of days to make partner for attorneys that joined as a lateral in 2025. The number has held steady over the past 4 years, but overall has increased by 34% over the last 10 years. While there's been an increase in non-equity partner tier, law firms risk losing non-equity partners if their compensation doesn't clearly outpace that of senior associates. According to a survey conducted by Major Lindsey, of some of the top firms, senior associates earn as much, if not more, than some non-equity partners. Firms are responding to this issue in different ways. In some structures, non-equity partners earn equitable amounts to high-performing associates. In other situations, depending on performance metrics, they can even make more than equity partners. But the key takeaway is if a firm wants to retain talent at the non-equity tier, they must ensure compensation reflects a meaningful and well-defined step up from associate ranks. They also need to ensure a clear path to equity partner if that's the path the partner wants to go. I'll stop here. Any comments or feedback from the group on all this?
I have lots to say on this. It's a big challenge for the firms I work with. Look, we've had too many lawyers go through this up or out model, right? The binary, you're either damaged goods or you're going to become an owner. When in fact, there are so many great lawyers who did not have what it takes to be an owner at that snapshot in time. And so they were sent there, packing. The non-equity tier is a great opportunity for an on-ramp for laterals, for a holding pattern for laterals on their way, or for associates on their way up. It's a great place for people stepping out of equity before they retire. It's also a great place to be a permanent, great contributor who should be paid very well, but just is not capable or does not want to be an owner. And so that's part of the challenge here. The non-equity tier is increasing both because, look, if there's fewer owners, there's more profits for the owners who remain, but also because it corrects this problem where we sent great talent we spent years training out the door for no reason other than they didn't have what we thought at that moment was the hallmark of an owner. And being an owner should be hard. There's a big difference. And you know what? In every business, every law firm on this call has a client where there are salespeople. The top salespeople in the organization are in the top third of earners in the entire corporation. And that's because it's hard to do, and you can be really well paid even if you're not an owner. So if someone's worth it, you pay them. It doesn't matter if they're outside the associate ranks and they're outside the non-equity tiers, and they can make more than equities. If there's a reason to pay them, we pay them. Now, if everything's absolute bedlam and everything's a one-off negotiation, that's hard to manage. But if we have one-offs and we say we're going to keep them, that's where the non-equity tier is great. The challenge, though, I'll say is this. If we promote too many people to non-equities, it's just the new equity partner. Now we're a diamond-shaped firm. Look, if you've got non-equities who are great senior lawyers who can bill senior rates, then you will profit from leverage. But if they are good senior associate level lawyers billing at mid-level rates, they're going to compete for work with the associates. And we're going to lose the leverage profit we get because we're paying them more than we're paying the associates. So it's a slippery slope. You should absolutely be strategic about having a non-equity tier and know what it's.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Lindsey, I had a question for you specifically, and you can kind of tell me what you guys do at WilmerHale or what you've been hearing in other law firms. But are law firms doing a good enough job explaining the timeline to when you're recruiting new lateral hires or new hires, or like the different paths that they could be taking when you recruit them? Are you guys sitting down and explaining the long term with them, and maybe even why the timeline shifts so much now?
Yes. So we talk about that with them when we extend the offer. It often comes up during their interview too, when they have the opportunity to ask some questions. We even put their earliest eligible promotion dates in their offer letters. We have, you can be hired as an associate, a senior associate, counsel, or when you're eligible for partner. So we put it whatever the next step is. So if they're associate, we put when they're first available to be promoted to senior associate in their offer letters. If they ask, we also have them talk to somebody who's involved in like the partner involvement elevation process. And often if we are hiring a counsel level candidate that's on the cusp of being eligible for partner, we have them talk to somebody who is actually involved in that promotion process so they can ask all of their kind of what is the process, how looped in am I versus who's my sponsor, how does that all work? And it's kind of just, it's after they have the offer. So, they can kind of ask the questions a little bit more. They don't have to worry about asking the questions that will be off-putting to somebody potentially during an interview.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So the competition for talent has trickled down to the law school hiring as well. We see changes in OCI hiring as well as acceleration in recruiting of law school students. Law schools are struggling to keep up with the changes, but we're watching this and how it impacts the industry moving forward. So for the first time since 2022, lateral associate hiring outpaced entry-level hiring, something we saw each year from 2018 to 2022. Entry-level hiring was up slightly over 24, but still down overall since the COVID correction year of 21. And back to some retention data where we're comparing lateral associate hires versus entry-level hires within the MLaw 200. Again, we're looking at the average number of associates that stay at least 3 years after joining a firm. I removed 24 and 25 because of the 3-year window still being open for those hires. The average from 2015 to 2023 is slightly better for entry-level associates at 53% versus lateral associates at 52%. With that said, if we look at the most recent year, 23, where the 3-year window is still open, the gap between entry level and lateral is larger at 65% versus 56%. Also in the chart, I broke out entry level hiring retention by those associates that joined from a T14 law school and ones that joined from a non-T14 law school. The retention for non-T14 is highest at an average of 55% across the 9-year period, whereas T14 retention is down around 50%. Also interesting to note, but not shown on the list here, as I uncovered, in the MLaw 200 back in 2015, T14 schools accounted for 47% of all entry-level hires. That number has actually shrunk down to 33% as of 2025. Bryson, I think you have some thoughts on this.
And I mean, I think there's a lot to go off of here. I mean, as far as retention for T14 students, I think a lot of what you're seeing is a function of just like marketability and the demand that they're getting from other firms. So it's just easier for them to move. And I do think there is a pretty strong argument to be made for firms continuing to invest in non-T14 candidates, to be honest. I mean, myself being a former T14 candidate, I don't want to like shoot us in the leg. But I mean, it's just the fact of the matter that a firm can rely on someone staying with them longer if that person has less options to leave, which again sounds a little toxic, but I think it's worth the investment and worth doubling down on that, to be honest.
And then
I just add too,
because
I think anyone on the call involved in summer entry-level hiring right now is kind of an all-out experience, to say it nicely. You know, we are recruiting for summer 2027 right now, and we are talking to students that haven't had their 1L summer yet. They haven't had that 1L job, the ability to meet mentors. They haven't finished their 1L year or had their whole first year course curriculum. So we started engaging with these students like the week they started law school, and it's just so unfortunate, but it's what the market is doing. And I think it's really going to, I think if we all sat here 3 years from today, when we start measuring the lateral changes of the entry levels and where they summered, I think we're going to see huge spikes because these students are just not making decisions based on their experience yet. Firms aren't hiring based on experience yet. Some of my interviewers right now are asking what they're supposed to talk about because they usually talk about their 1L job, and now they like talk about their kind of summer job in high school. So I think the numbers are really going to change, and we're going to see a lot more lateral activity, but it's also going to be challenging because so many firms have downsized the size, including Wilmer, downsized the size of their summer class. So there will be fewer candidates to lateral when this all catches up to us. So it'll be interesting to see all the effects that this early process has.
All right. Now, jumping ahead, the regulatory and political pressure that the industry saw in 2025, it saw unprecedented political pressure on U.S. law firms from the administration targeting firms over DEI and pro bono work. Some firms reached costly pro bono agreements to avert sanctions, while others pushed back. These dynamics triggered internal backlash, influence hiring and retention decisions, and have lingering effects potentially on the firms moving forward. But as the year progressed, the Microsoft slightly pulled back, but we'll see how the impacts are still being felt. Despite the challenges, the industry has continued to get more diverse, as we talked earlier. Here's a breakdown of current state for gender diversity, ethnic diversity, and for those that are gender and ethnically diverse within the MLaw 200. When we've seen slight upticks across all different segments, both across gender and ethnic diversity went up slightly, 11.2% to 11.7%. Ethnically diverse attorneys went up to 20.2 to 20.8, and gender diversity saw an increase of 1 full percentage point to 40.6 to 41.5. We're seeing within the partnership ranks, jumping ahead here, partners have seen a slight uptick for gender and ethnic diversity, but a larger increases for ethnically diverse attorneys, a 0.6% increase from 2024 and a 1.4% increase from 2023. Gender diversity was up 1%, ended 2025 at 30.3%. For gender and ethnic diverse counsels, we see the category went up a full point in 2024 and 2023, but only went up 0.4% in 2025. Ethnically diverse counsels, however, went up 1.2% in 2025, and this kept pace with the previous years. And gender diverse counsels saw a 0.8% increase. This follows a 1.3% increase in 2024. And then we finally see with the associates, as we talked about, we've seen increases across all categories. Gender and ethnic diversity, we see a 0.8% increase after a 0.9% increase in 2024. Ethnically diverse attorneys were up 0.9%, which was down slightly from 24. And we see that there's in the gender diversity, we're up to 53.2%. And as previously noted, there's more females graduating law school. So the pool of female associates is larger. Promotions to partners for females remained steady in 2025 versus 2024. No change as it relates to percentage of overall promotions being female versus male. For ethnic diversity promotions, 2025 saw a slight decline to 18% of all promotions after holding steady at 19% the previous 2 years. Any comments on any of that? I know we're over the hour mark, but we keep moving.
I just want to get some people's thoughts on what they've been seeing lately in their day-to-days. Bryson, as you deal with candidates and placements, are candidates more, I don't know, asking more questions about firm culture and DEI, and are more than they used to be maybe now with everything happening?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, it's a huge issue. And I think before there was a little bit of transparency with how firms were reporting things and talking about diversity and how they valued it or did not value it. And now a lot of the information on what things would be like for diverse candidates is hidden, or you need to dig a lot deeper to get it, to get a real answer. So that I've seen a huge uptick in that because that's kind of somewhere where I specialize and I have a lot of information that's informal that can be very helpful. So that's been a definite thing that people ask about. I've even had, I'd probably say half the candidates I've worked with over the past year have explicitly told me that they have no interest in applying to firms that made deals with the Trump administration this past year. So that's like a hard line for some people. Others, it's like a little iffy where they're willing to dig into it and say, like, how has that actually been implemented on the ground? Has the pro bono actually been affected? And firms like WilmerHale, for instance, I believe signed the amicus or represented somebody or sued the administration directly. And so that's been a big boost as well for both candidates and law students, honestly. So that's something that continues to pop up, and I don't think it's going to really go away. And with the diversity numbers that we're seeing, even at the law school level where it's shifting, like if we are losing Black and brown candidates, but we're also gaining a lot more other diverse categories of candidates as well. So I think the overall representation isn't really going to shift that meaningfully. And so firms would do well to remember that this is still going to be a significant portion of their talent pool for the foreseeable future. And even though those folks might not be super vocal, there are conversations happening behind the scenes constantly, and people are paying attention, and they do remember how the firms are conducting themselves and how the firms do hold true to the values that they said they had 2 years ago versus, what they're doing now. So that's what I'd probably focus on there.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to point a finger over at Lindsey. Want to get your thoughts. Are you experiencing or hearing more questions pointed at you guys around this when you're recruiting individuals and candidates, or are they asking more questions kind of on the same thing?
Yes, we get candidates. We got a surge of candidates from firms that made deals with Trump, saying, you know, we want to work with you, not with them, more than we could take. And it was really tough at points because these are amazing candidates that in other days we would, or when other needs existed, we would want, or, you know, jump over hoops to get. As we're in the student arena right now, largely, it's noted in a lot of cover letters. They first heard about us when we, you know, stood up to Trump or other things that we've done. WilmerHale is a very understated firm. They don't love to shout from the rooftops things we're doing. And one of the message boards I read kind of last spring was like, WilmerHale's non-response is like them preparing for battle and war, and you know, you can see them kind of circling and preparing. So when we did put a statement out, it was a nice thing. But as the recruiter at the firm, I have really wanted to boast more about that because I think it could help us even more. But the firm does take the approach like we're a little bit more understated in our messaging. So it's been nice to see that people are still recognizing it 10 months later. And probably will for the foreseeable future. So,
yeah. Well, thank you for the transparency, both of you.
All right. So AI, we can't do a webinar without talking about AI. No question about it. Legal Tech Hub put out this image back in September. This is all the companies currently in the legal industry incorporating some form of AI in their products. There are over 700 products here. I often say that we've been doing AI before AI was cool. But firms definitely spent a lot of time and money in 2025 looking at AI and which tools were the right ones to help drive the most efficiencies at their firms. Some spent big. There's a rise in firms hiring engineers and AI specialists to do a lot more of this work in-house. AI is no longer optional. Clients assume firms are using it. Some estimates have AI legal market at just over $2 billion in 2025, with the potential to reach $8 to $10 billion by 2030. The benefits of AI are being seen across numerous areas of law firm, talent management, client service, research, contract review, litigation, corporate and compliance, as well as numerous back office tasks are being effective with the use of AI. Bloomberg put out a report on AI back in spring of this year that shows an increase in usage by attorneys. 64% of those surveyed are using AI for legal research. 39% are using AI to draft internal and external communication. 37% of them are using it for summarizing legal narratives. The report found that younger attorneys, not surprisingly, are using it more, but over 50% of all attorneys in every age group, regardless of years in practice, were using AI to some degree. Again, the report was from the spring, so it's almost a year old. So you can imagine numbers have certainly increased. Over the summer, SurePoint did a survey in collaboration with Ari Koplin of mid-sized law firms, and we saw similar responses to the Bloomberg report. 63% of law firms surveyed have officially adopted some sort of AI program and policy in their firms. The most popular AI tool being implemented is Microsoft Copilot. 44% of survey responses said that they can bill for work being done by generative AI. Over half of the firms surveyed said that they have eliminated roles at their firm based on legal technology, but only 3% said they have eliminated roles specifically because of AI. With that said, survey participants anticipate AI will have an impact on staffing in the near future. 94% of participants directly attributed some increase in revenue and improved client service because of their adoption of legal technology. 81% of law firms surveyed said that they've seen an adoption of legal technology as a competitive advantage in attracting and retaining talent. As an example of technology improving law firm performance, SurePoint has been offering electronic payment services since 2022, and have been tracking stats on usage, both of electronic payments as well as collections from traditional methods. Our research suggests that now 260,000 attorneys are accepting digital payments, and that's up 4.3% from 2024. The speed to process a digital payment has improved by 2 calendar days in 2025 compared to 2024. And this brings the average speed to full payment to 34 days from invoice to paid in full. In contrast, checks are taking longer. In 2025, the average time to get paid for checks increased by 4 full days, bringing check payments up to 80 days from invoice to payment in full. In addition, faster turnaround for payment in full is reported that check payments amount for the highest markdown percentage of any payment method. So firms are collecting payments in full quicker and at a higher amounts. And the data actually shows that the average amount of digital payment is 44% higher in collections through traditional methods. Any thoughts on AI? I'm sure there's plenty of them. Anyone wants to jump in there?
I'll post something and then see what people think. Have we seen more and more law firms be more transparent about the use of AI and how they're using it in matters and cases? And are they releasing it on website as far as like, this is how we're using it, how we serve our clients? Have you guys seen firms just be more open about it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you see it in engagement letters a lot more, but really it's less about trying to be transparent and more about clients are demanding it now. Clients are actively saying, if you're going to charge me a high hourly rate, you need to show me that you are doing your best to be efficient and you're using AI to do it.
Got it. Cool. Okay.
Lindsey and Bryson, how has the AI sort of impacted the recruiting processes for you guys, if at all?
I mean, for my process, a ton. Honestly, there's a lot of work that can be done with automation for the recruiting process in general, outreach, keeping track of candidates, that kind of thing. On the firm side with the transparency question, I've noticed this theme where even the very tech-focused large law firms who are implementing a ton of AI internally aren't really shouting from the rooftops that they're doing that. I do think when you're engaging with a client from the firm perspective, it's probably smart to put that in there to show that you are trying to minimize their bill and that things are being used. But I'm not sure how nitty gritty they are in terms of like, what are you actually doing? What percentage of the time is being used with this software? But from the attorney perspective, the associates that I've talked to at firms that are very heavily, ingraining these processes, like it is a part of everyday life now. They have access to multiple different AI platforms that they can use. Results may vary in terms of how associates actually feel those tools are useful or not, but they are an option at a lot of different firms right now, and it's probably gonna, be more ingrained as time goes on, especially what we've seen with like Harvey and ChatGPT seed money going into a bunch of different ventures. So I don't think it's going away in any sector, honestly, in the economy.
A quick one little tidbit. Does a firm's tech stack and the software and tools they use, could that impact retention? And these attorneys using what they want to use and what they like to use, will that impact the retention down the line or now?
I think maybe in terms of overall adoption, like if you're deciding between a couple firms and one of them at least has a strategy and an option to use AI and the other is just way behind the ball, and it's very clear that the partners aren't on top of it or looking at it as a new tool, that might kind of play in there where you're just thinking maybe this firm's business line isn't tracking what's actually happening in the economy and actually changing with the times. And that would be a signal that maybe I don't want to stay at that firm or choose that firm because they're behind. But in terms of like a specific use case, like if one firm has Harvey and the other has like Legora, I don't think that's really going to affect things for now until it becomes a way bigger chunk of what you're actually doing in the day-to-day.
I see this culture surveys I'll look at in my work, and I'll say this: I speak at a lot of law schools. Not all of them are yet teaching lawyers how to practice them are still teaching them how to think only. But those who come into a firm and they've spent a couple of years learning how to code or learning how to do project management or using different tools, and then they get to the firm and the partner looks at them and says, why in the world did we do that? We can bill fewer hours if we're efficient. That's a sort of cultural issue that is related to the tech stack. Maybe the tech's there, but that practice doesn't want to use it. And I think that's one of the reasons why law firms don't trumpet this as much yet, is because do we know of anything that is universally used by all lawyers and all practices? So if we set the expectation that we are fully embracing AI, but we're only doing it in 3 areas and not 10, we're going to set expectations for clients. So where I see the compliance with client demand saying, tell us what you're using and when you're using it, is that's when they're promoting it. I'll say this though, AI is a tool like any other. It's the latest thing, but we had technology 10 years ago, 20 years ago. We had email 30 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it was. It was this big disruption. And imagine a world in which 15 years ago, we said, maybe with access to external staffing models or outsourcing or with ALSPs, we could have a just-in-time model and we could expand and contract our footprint when our demand gets bigger or contract when it gets lower. And what if we were able to flat fee certain things because we've gotten so good at it with process improvement and project management? And we said, you know what, don't worry about it. If there's a major scope difference, we'll talk about it. Otherwise, we'll do this portfolio work, or we'll do this matter for this flat fee. Now imagine the clients are conditioned on that and AI comes along and finds a way to lower your cost even more. What profit drops into the law firm's partners' hands? But instead, we've clung to the model of monetizing inefficiency. And so the biggest hurdle to AI is not whether it hallucinates or whether or not Harvey's better than ChatGPT. It's, do the lawyers understand how to run a business where efficiency generates more profits than inefficiency? I think that the jury's still out on that.
All right. Now we're going to segue over to a sneak peek into our 2025 Leopard Law Firm Index, our LLFI. For those that aren't familiar, we launched this back in 2020 as a way to evaluate the health and stability of a law firm in real time. We update our data twice a week, score firms based on the metrics listed. Data gets updated weekly as the law firm's score is updated accordingly. Data at the bottom of the pyramid is weighted more than what's at the top. We value headcount growth, but we also value retention, both long-term and short-term in our model. Diversity plays a role, as does steady year-over-year growth in financials. People can go to our website. You can see the current list of scores for the top 200 that are listed there. How we put together our large law LFI. We look at firms with at least 150 attorneys from within the U.S. And we look at each firm's placement on a weekly basis from the previous year, average it out to give you the top firms based on their success over the course of 2025. Last year, we did a mid-size top 200, which is firms 50 to 150. The large law LFI will be due out in a few weeks. Mid-size will be due out late spring. So here is a sneak peek into our top 10 for the large law Leopard large law LLFI. And you can see Kirkland has retained the top spot for 2025, a position they've held every year since 2023, with the exception of 2023. Latham moved up from 4 to 2 in 2025, while Holland and Knight dropped from 2 to 3. Two firms saw big jumps in their placement in comparison to last year. Lewis Brisbois jumped from 97 to 6, and Sidley jumped from 65 to 4. Sidley stabilized in 2025 from a slightly down year in 24 from a headcount perspective. So that helped their growth, but their short-term retention was very strong, both for laterals and entry-level hires. They were over 90% over the course of 2025 and retaining recent hires. So that's helped stabilize their score and return them to the top 10. For Lewis Brisbois, their headcount also grew from 1% down in 2024 to up 6% in 2025. Again, retention combined with the lateral growth helped position them in the top 10. And then we also saw Troutman jump 34 places from 43rd to 9th, and that's in large part because of the combination with Loch Lord. Others that returned from last year's top 10 include Greenberg, Gibson Dunn, and Simpson Thatcher. All right, so now we're gonna, before we get into our crystal ball and the look ahead for 2026, when we asked everyone to register, and I think we had over 600 people register, which is great. We asked them all to give us their one word on what they are seeing or what's their top priority for 2026. So here's the responses from our folks that registered. And you can see AI, growth, efficiency lead the way within the word cloud that's listed there. But there's also other information in here around recruiting and placing and retention. So a big bag of continuation of what we've seen in 2025 as we head into 2026. But now I think we'll turn it over to the panelists. Maybe you guys can give us your outlook on 2026, what you guys think is going to be different, remain the same. What's your big takeaway as we go into 2026?
I can kick us off. I think we're going to see a lot of firms reevaluating their tech in 2026. The early adopters of AI have had a chance to see what works for them. If the product they're using has been good, or if they need something better, they're going to have a chance to consolidate tools. If they've been trying 2 or 3 items and they've found that one really stands out, it'll be a chance for them to go that way. On the flip side, maybe some firms are jumping in late, and some firms maybe just have heard from other firms, hey, this tool's a lot better than others. And I don't think it's just going to be on AI. I think as these firms continue to spend more and more on AI tech, they're going to also have to reconsider, is the rest of our tech stack really covering the costs? If we are using a different product for our time and billing versus our general ledger versus our workflows, do we need to start considering consolidating into one single product, save us money here because we're going to have to spend that money on AI? So I think this year is going to be a chance, both an opportunity and maybe a stressor for firms as they start to really think about their tech spending.
Tim?
Yeah, I think there's so many variables about what this year could hold, and that's because of the geopolitical issues going on. But by and large, we don't have some sort of self-imposed recession. I think law firms are going to have a good year. But I think the focus is going to be, to use the old W term, strategery, right? Like, are we focused on the right things? And do we have the right people guiding the ship? There is no better time like the present to make sure that the people running your law firm have some business acumen, because this is not yesterday's law firm. It's a complicated world. And I was giving a talk at a managing partner forum about 6 months ago, and one managing partner stood up and asked, like, we can afford associates or we can afford AI. We can't do both. So which should it be? And my reaction to that was, you're asking the wrong question. The premise is that partners don't want to lose any income, so we can only keep one expense bucket. And like, you're investing in your firm wrong. You're not understanding that it's the owner's job to invest in areas of growth and opportunity and decide what kind of culture and what kind of firm you want to run. But simply looking at a cost that is, whether it's to fundamentally reinvent your firm like AI can do, or whether it's associates who are not fungible, they are good people who do good work. You have to understand, are we investing for the growth of the firm? Or are we simply trying to preserve our status quo income without making any change and see if we're going to ride it out until the end of my career? So hopefully that doesn't strike too cynical a note, because there's so many good law firms embracing the right things, doing it the right way, or at least trying. And I think that's a sign that bodes well for the future.
Love it. Bryson?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll keep my predictions fairly broad, because I think based on last year, who knows what's going to happen. Broadly, I think the themes that I'm looking out for are basically just like the corporatization of big law and law firms in general, kind of speaking to what you were saying, Tim, where last year, a lot of things we saw, even the way that firms interacted politically with the administration, it's much more in line with how a business that's purely focused on profit maximizing would act. which like has negatives and positives that comes along with it. Same thing that we're seeing with the way that talent is being recruited at the student level. That's moving earlier and earlier, which looks a lot more like how major banks recruit students in that timeline. And other themes with recruitment and adopting technology. I think there's going to be more pressure to actually lean into the efficiency model. And like you were saying, Tim, it just isn't, the billable hour stuff isn't really super compatible with how technology is shifting. And if you can turn a document very quickly, you're basically penalized if you're using a billable hour model. So I think firms are going to have to start adopting like a, deliverable pricing mechanism. Because, I think firms should be rewarded for the knowledge that they're bringing in. And if you have a giant database of legal knowledge that you've accumulated over time through expertise, there's no reason why a firm shouldn't be compensated highly for that data that goes into drafting something. Maybe you draft it in like 2 minutes, but it's still the knowledge that's been accumulated that's being crafted by attorneys that is the value, not necessarily the hour. So I think altogether, we're just going to see a continued movement towards, like the corporatization where firms are no longer under the illusion that they are anything or necessarily greater than the next big business. And I think that's what I'll be anticipating.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I'll just add, I think this year is going to definitely be a year of implementation of all the things that did happen in 2025. I definitely think there'll be a continuation of a lot of the things that we saw and talked about. But I do think that there's going to be this level of digesting everything that has happened and then trying to implement those changes and see what kind of reaction and feedback we got. So I had said I started the webinar with the term buckle up. I don't think the roller coaster ride's changing anytime soon. So we better double strap ourselves in because I think it's just going to continue forward.
Buckle up. That's what I love.
Yeah.
Well, as we come to an end here, I just want to say thank you again to our panelists who joined us today. I know we went over our promised hour of this webinar, but we had so much data to share, so much interesting topics to discuss, and we could probably go on for 2 more hours. You guys good for that? No, I'm kidding. Anyways, what the good thing is, we have so much more data that you saw, more than you saw here in this hour. We're going to be including it into our annual white paper, our State of Legal Industry white paper that's going to be coming out after this webinar. We'll keep you up to date on when those dates will be on the publishing side of things. But man, what an hour, what an hour and a half almost, so much discussion. Thank you all for joining us. The recording of this webinar will be shared with everyone who signed up for the webinar. You might have didn't attend, or you might have had a friend that didn't attend. That's okay. If they signed up, they're going to get the webinar recording. It will be sent to them along with the webinar slides that we went through together. So you will get both of them in an email, a webinar recording and slides given to your inbox after this webinar. I appreciate everyone joining us. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks, everyone.